Okay, this is part 2 of the Chapter 4 lecture, Television's Reality Genres. We're going to look at 4 different genres here: newscasts, sports programs, game shows, and a little bit more on reality television. So here's what's going to happen in a newscast. Here's what they see as newsworthy: catastrophes, international relations, national politics, law and order, economics, and celebrities. Everything you see in a newscast is going to fall into one of these categories. And as we said before, newscasts use the expository mode to present an argument about reality. They're talking directly to the camera, they're exposing what they know to be true, the facts that they know to be true, and they're presenting it in such a way that you can form an opinion about it. Let's look at 2 different networks in reporting the same incident. It's important to note that different producers are going to select different methods of presenting things that they see in the historical world. So CBS's coverage of a Balkan War incident includes decaying corpses, not shown in NBC's reporting of the same incident. CBS's story ends with Muslim fighters on the literal high ground, whereas NBC's coverage concludes with birds on a non-functional runway. So a very different kind of slant or perspective they want you to see and form your own reality based on their version of it. So continuing with newscasts, basic journalistic guidelines, they have to ask themselves, timeliness. Is this timely? Is this something that people are interested in right now? What's the prominence? How important is it? How famous are the people involved? What's the proximity? How close is it to us and to our lives? What is the pertinence? Does it affect our everyday lives? Is it unusual? Is it something that's a little different than what we've seen before? And is there conflict? So these things are also, coming through in your narrative shows, but in non-narrative shows, they want it to be dramatic. They want it to be interesting and to catch your attention. So you're not going to see stories that are somewhat normal. Basic journalistic guidelines also include visual impact. They think about that and what kind of footage do they have to make it good? How much does it cost to produce it? And how can they promote it? Are they going to be able to get people to watch their program based on this and promote themselves? So a structure of a newscast, if you sit down and watch a 30-minute newscast, this is what you're going to see. There's going to be a news block, there's going to be commercial breaks, there's going to be another news block, and then there's going to be commercial breaks. This is just in the first 15 minutes. That's generally how they structure it. Then in the second half, you're going to have weather, commercial, sports, commercial, and news block. This is pretty standard. If you look at the schedule on page 119, it's very interesting, and I encourage you to follow along with the 30-minute broadcast and see how closely they follow that. So here's what opening credits look like. Very dramatic, very bold, capturing your attention. This is the opening credits. They all kind of have a theme. We've got you covered. They have like a little mantra that they use, and even news stories, they're going to come up with a title for it. Which leads to a shot of the anchors, Fran Curry and Mike Royer. And I encourage you to look at the Code of Ethics and Standards link that I provided in N2L, D2L. It's very interesting because as you watch news shows, you need to be judging them by the standards that they uphold and see how well they follow that. So, continuing on with sports. This is very different because sports are a commercial event that's already been contrived to please spectators, and then it's marketed to attract an audience. So it's something that already exists in our historical world that just happens to be filmed rather than the news broadcast, which is created just for television. So the right to broadcast sports events must be purchased from sports leagues and team owners. You probably know about this. Journalistic notions of objectivity become twisted a little bit. Advertisers are inserted into games. Soot Hawley comes up with the term the sports media complex. They're kind of working together. They're making it a commercial event where it wasn't necessarily a commercial event before. So, the quality of the game is going to be twisted a little bit by the commercial needs of the television network. For example, that Sprint sign back there behind the home plate is actually not really there. It was a green screen that the network then inserted whatever they wanted to insert based on who provided the most amount of money. So the ball game players and the producers, or the people who work at the ball field, don't necessarily know what the network needs. So the network comes in and puts their own little thing there. So that green screen is specifically for that purpose. So keep an eye out for that when you're watching sports on television. It's kind of funny. Here's some worlds. Every time you see statistics or something popping up on the screen, it's going to be sponsored by something. And the announcers usually are going to say it. You know, whenever they get a chance, they're going to say, brought to you by blah, blah, blah. You know, this play-by-play brought to you by, or this timeout was brought to you by. Everything is going to be sponsored by somebody. So continuing on with sports. The aesthetic structure of television sports is very fascinating. Television timeouts, we can break this down into time, space, and scoring. So for example, television timeouts, color announcers, play-by-play commentary, they're doing whatever they can to make it dramatic, to make the time structure fit our dramatic structure that we naturally crave, because this isn't a program that has a script that we can follow, and so how can we help create that script? Well, that's what the television does. That's what the structure is going to do. They're going to actually give some power to the referees to call the television timeout when they need to, and it's a very neutral thing. They don't judge it by the teams, whatever teams needs it the most. It's just something that they organize ahead of time. And so, you know, sports have had to adjust the way that they present their game in a time frame in order to fit the television's needs. So it's definitely a joint effort here. The camera is definitely going to be manipulated for effect, and there's a lot of great innovations that have been made in the last 10 years on what kind of digital HD photography they can do. You might have seen the wires that go across a field where they can actually put cameras moving across and getting a bird's eye view of the action, which wasn't done before. So there's a lot of really cool effects. They're going to have low camera angles. When somebody's running into the end zone, you're going to see a very dramatic kind of view of that. So the camera can really sell the drama of the game in a way that you wouldn't necessarily get sitting in the stadium. So, and scoring and competition creates a natural dramatic structure as well. The game itself is dramatic, and it hopefully avoids television death. Television death is something that would happen if the teams are really bad, or if one team is just stomping on the other team. People are going to change the channel. And so the advertisers are hoping that the game is going to be good. They're hoping that it's going to be very, very competitive and dramatic, because that is going to help sell their products. So here's an example of something else that can be done. A computer-generated graphic visualizes the territory needed for a first down, so you get a little bit more of a dramatic bird's eye view that people wouldn't get in the stadium. They create that yellow line there to help you follow what's going on. Okay, so let's move on to the game show. This is similar to sports because it's a game and it's competitive, but it's not a pre-existing historical reality. It's not something you would see by going to a stadium. You wouldn't buy a ticket to just go and then it happens to be filmed. It is created for television, which is what makes it a little different than the sports events. It does not originate in the historical world. It originates in television, and it constructs a reality that brings social actors into it. And you can think of athletes as social actors as well, because they're in public and they have an audience, and so they're real people. They're not actors, but they're in front of people. Same thing with your social actors in a game show. So they call this the semi-direct address. The game show host does not speak directly to us, but instead addresses directly the contestants. We are invited to see ourselves as contestants, but at the same time we're also invited to compete with the contestant. So in that way it's very different than sports, because we can't really see ourselves on the field, although we might yell at the players because we think we know what they should do. But in a way we can play along with the game because it's, quizzes or questions or things like that. So Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is a really famous one. Here's a contestant. She calls her husband for help with a question. We have 24 seconds remaining, so obviously the social actor doesn't see those choices there. I guess she does see the choices, but she doesn't see them in the same way that the people watching do. So the game show, again, organizes time and space in such a way that creates drama. It creates its own time and space from scratch. Thus, they shape the competition to fit in between commercial breaks. So they actually plan out how many questions and how many games they're going to play. And of course, you can't do that in sports. You can't plan how many downs you're going to have. That's going to be improvised by the players. So it's a little bit more organized. And it's very competitive, and it can be kind of tweaked as well. There's been cases of game shows being fixed, and so that can be a problem. but we're talking about academic knowledge, we're talking everyday knowledge, we're talking knowledge of people, knowledge of specific individuals. So that's the kind of thing you're competing for. Okay, the last thing we'll talk about is reality television. This is part of your discussion as well, so think clearly about this. If you haven't watched a lot of reality television, maybe check some out for your discussion to see what you can say to other students about what you've seen. This is a current incarnation of it. Began around 2000. That's when Big Brother, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and Survivor debuted on international primetime major network television, and it really turned the television world on its head. In fact, the actors' unions were getting very upset by this because these are real people coming in off the street, getting paid lots and lots of money, and getting really famous for no reason, according to the actors. They had no talent, they had no skill, they weren't reading a script. They were just being themselves. And so the writers and the actors that had been so established in the television world were really kind of scratching their heads going, oh dear, how does this affect us? How do we blend this kind of new phenomenon into our scripted television shows? And it was very loosely defined at first. There are lots of possibilities that have now really quadrupled since then. So we have to ask ourselves, is this a genre? What new meanings does it bring to non-narrative TV modes of presentation? And also, what meanings does it bring to narrative television? How does narrative television try to be more interactive? And we've seen in the previous chapters that narrative television does try to be more realistic and bring itself into people's homes, as you've seen in the interactivity stuff we've talked about. So here we are. Let's try to propose some genre boundaries. Okay, so a minimum of scripted dialogue and action. That's what they say. They don't want to tell the people what to say. We have a cast of social actors drawn from the historical world coming into the studio and being locked up in a room or whatever to see how they act. And it's a style of sound and image drawn from documentary or the game show, so it is stealing from these other genres. It's stealing from the documentary because you're having commentary, you're having those pseudo-monologues, and the game show you're having interactivity perhaps between the producers and what's going on. So it's blending a lot of these things together. We can talk about subgenres. You've got courtroom and law enforcement shows, you have dating shows, you have docu-soap or docudramas, you have game doc, competition or group challenge shows like Survivor. You have hidden cameras like the prank shows that you see, or the taxi cab confessions. So there's lots of different categories you can put your reality show into. There's also makeover and self-improvement shows. There's reality sitcoms. There's renovation. We like to see, people fixing up their homes or things like that. We have lots of talent contests and searches, even daytime talk shows, chat shows, as they call them in the UK, can be very interesting for people to watch. So again, social actors are involved in all of these. These aren't narrative scripted shows necessarily, but they're very, very popular. And just to remind you, reality TV modes of representation that are used are expository or rhetorical, where they talk directly to the camera and they present an argument. They can be interactive, where the producers and the filmmakers are actually interacting with the characters, or observational, where the camera's more hidden. So think about this as you enter into your discussion and use these terms, use these descriptions, because I'm going to be looking for that in your discussion as well.